Hello and welcome to the AutoTalk Weekly Wrap. I am your host, Richard Edwards, and next to me is the dealer that sells Aquas and likes to complain a lot,
I do not.
Graeme McDonald. And before we start, I'm just going to get my weekly torture of Graeme out of the way because we always like to do that. What do you think of this, Graeme? I spotted this on social media yesterday, and I thought of you exactly when I saw it. It's from a New Zealand group. Had my Mustang Marquee 3 weeks now, and so happy with it. Traded in my Mustang 5.0.
Well, good for them. You get a gold medal star for the week. I'll put it in your little chart, and you can unpack it into your sippy bottle as well. I could share with you all the Cars of Australia site with all the people that are magically suddenly just had my BYD for 2 weeks and I've just got a company car and I don't want to sell it, but just suddenly feel inclined to. We can play that game, Richard. Go on, make it a challenge.
Look, this isn't an EV versus non-EV thing, Graeme. This is a Mustang thing. You'll note that he's called it the Mustang Mark-E, not the Mustang. So that's a Mustang V8 owner who is using the Mustang name on it. So, yeah.
Well, I don't blame him. That's what it says on the badge, right? The box says Mustang Marquee. That's what you're going to call it. I get that.
Yes. Look, now we actually have a special guest joining us this week, and someone to balance out my idiocy and your arguably used import bias, Graeme. Arguably.
I just love cars, Richard.
Now, this guest is well known to the trade, but is now not working within it as such. Here, absolutely without his MIA hat on, and here as an independent expert in the automotive industry, is David Crawford. Thanks for joining us, David.
Well, that's an unusual introduction. I'm going to have to get used to that.
Come on in, David. The water's fine.
I guess the key thing is now you can tell us what you really think rather than what the corporate line is, so to speak.
You mean I haven't been already?
Was that muted right here, David?
Couldn't possibly comment, Graeme.
Now, I think what I'm going to do first is, look, let's just open with a subject, and I'm going to give you both 30 seconds just to give your very quick reaction to from both of you. And we'll start with you, David, and just one word, 3 letters, CCD.
Expected, but disappointing.
I imagine it's kept Amy, your replacement, well on her toes this week. I know she joined us for the industry live stream that I highly recommend everyone goes and watches on probably the same channels you're watching this on. Quite the fire on her arrival.
Yeah, she got thrown in the deep end, and I think what caught us by surprise is the shortness of implementation, but understood. The 100 million that they topped the fund up with only gets them to the end of June to get them to later in the year when we wanted it to bite, so we could protect forward orders. Would have required $300 or $400 million top up, and that was just not going to happen.
Is that, do you think, because it's too successful, or that it was just not planned quite right from the start?
Probably a bit of both. I have to say that pure battery electric vehicles for new vehicles from August through to December last year exceeded expectations, even my most optimistic predictions. And then when we look at the percentage of sales of BEVs this year, it's already at about 15% of monthly sales. And the discounts, this whole thing called, it's economic instruments for environmental management. That's what the CCD is. And if you get the levels right, it is a powerful influencer. And this is a really good demonstration of a decent discount. And people feel like they're getting a bargain, even though BEVs cost twice the price of their ICE equivalents. They just feel they're getting a saving, a bargain. That's the word I wanted. They feel like they're getting a bargain.
Everyone loves free money.
Gosh, you should be a car salesman there, David. That was a great little line. Can I throw my 10 cents worth in here?
Yeah, Graeme, you've got your 30 seconds, so to speak.
Well, no, it's a question for David actually, because I've been mulling over this for the last couple of days. Is that I think everyone agrees CCD has been a huge success as a scheme overall, but it's also a case of timing is everything. And the CCD scheme came at a point arriving parallel at the moment, if you think about it, when EV production ability and model availability arrived on our stage or global stage at the same time. So prior to CCD, we had a lot of talk around the new models coming, particularly from China, being the up-and-coming powerhouse for EV production. We had a lot of models potentially in the mix. We had the Tesla production shifting to China. At that point in time, we had all sorts of issues coming out of America. And so it arrived at the same time as the EV market, not in terms of public perception, but availability happened. And so the sales that have occurred of BEVs since that point in time aren't necessarily because of CCD, but it's just really good timing that we suddenly had the availability in the marketplace. And yes, I know there's an argument to say that the models were here as a result of CCD and CCS allowing manufacturers to push product down to New Zealand, but I think there's also a lot of really good timing in there as well.
It's true to a certain extent, Graeme, yes. The issue for the new vehicles, which is because, as you know, we operate quite differently to used. The used market is fortunate in one respect that you just go out and be opportunistic and look what's there. And if there's not a lot there, then you can't be opportunistic. For us, it's about availability and allocation. And the availability question is most certainly there are a lot more models available, but allocation is the key component for how the new vehicle distributors in New Zealand work. What the CCD and the CCS have done is that it's enabled the New Zealand importers of new vehicles to go back to their head offices and say, and plead a really good case for allocation, which then begs the question, Richard, about the National Party's views about the CCD going forward. And if they pull it, and they pull it quickly, what will that do to allocation, at least for the new vehicle sector? And when is the allocation point going to be driven more by the Clean Car Standard versus the CCD? That's a complex set of questions the new vehicle sector struggles with. And it's a different set of issues. I mean, both the new and used struggle with these interventions, but the nature of our struggles are different.
Actually, not quite. You're right, David. We had the same thing happen in Japan with our used stock on a much smaller version, where we've seen the massive exodus of used hybrids finally coming into the marketplace in Japan in the last couple of years. So the Toyota Aqua, which we all use as the benchmark now for a hybrid, came out in 2012. And the last couple of years, we've seen all those first generation and second generation Aquas finally arrive on the market in enough volume in Japan to make them an affordable option to import down. So timing was also a factor there too. We're not just importing them because we wanted them, it's because they finally became available in the volumes that our market needed. So there's a bit of a parallel there between the two. I get what you're saying. We're both on the same page. We just we are both to an extent driven by availability of the stock at the time and pleading the case for what's going to work.
I guess if you're a distributor now, you would be having someone looking at a crystal ball asking whether you should be dialing down your EV forward ordering and your hybrid forward ordering beyond, maybe November this year. I guess they'd be watching. We've said it before. This is going to be such a heavily watched election. I do find it interesting that ACT this week released their plan for the first 90 days. Just a card saying what things are going to go in the first 90 days, what they're going to do. Dumping the ute tax, as they call it, was not on that card. So, while I think that's still a promise of theirs, I'm wondering if both those guys understand it may not be quite as simple as what they're saying to do. Or they've just gone, it's not ranking.
No, it's a good point. We've met with Simeon Brown. Well, I've met with Simeon Brown a few times, so Amy will be meeting with him in due course and quite soon. And I just pleaded my case with National to say, look, we accept that the discount will go at some point. It was always going to be a transitionary intervention to kickstart, accelerate the uptake. The standard was always intended to keep the pressure on. National's got an interesting perspective as far as I understand it being they want to work with both the new and used sectors around the standard and having targets that are challenging but not ridiculous. And they want to do away with the discount. So we said, well, if you do away with the discount, just give us a transition time to manage exactly that question you pose. How do we manage that ordering stock? The unfortunate outcome of this year, 1 July, suddenly means a whole lot of vehicles that are really important for accelerating our transition to a low emission economy, i.e. hybrids, are no longer going to be incentivized. And it's this is why I'm not a salesman, Graeme. I don't know how to predict how that's going to impact sales, but I can have a guess that it might slow it down because the phrase that Amy's used, which I tended not to use, but I like, it's a new phrase that I've learned, the proposition value has changed. They were thinking they were going to buy this vehicle, get a bit back. Now they're not. Will that change the proposition value that they thought about for the trade-in for a new vehicle?
Yeah, well, I think we're hearing numbers that Twitter have put around of potentially it's worth about $30 million to customers, the cars that are ordered now that won't be delivered by July 1. And that's something that I think has been overlooked by a lot of media that, sure, the government had to patch this hole in funding, but basically they've dumped all of that cost straight into the customer's hands. And well, look, everyone knows I'm very pro-EV, but I do believe hybrids are a big chunk of this process. And to see how hard this line has been drawn, I mean, the Toyota Corolla hybrid, a car that will do 100 kilometres on about the same amount of gas that your Mustang will take turning over, Graeme, is off. It's out of the line, and that's crazy.
I just don't count.
by one gram. Let's be fair, Graeme. The CCD charge on a Mustang's what about? It's got to be near the top now, over $5,000.
Probably. I mean, if you're buying a Mustang, Richard, who cares? You've made that value judgment already. And I think that's actually a good point, though, to unpack, is that for a lot of the really what we now classify as high-emitting vehicles, the so-called evil Queen Street Ute drivers that I probably was one until I got a Mustang, we don't care. You buy it not because of what it necessarily costs, but because it's what you actually want. And I think they're the whole aspirational purchase versus pragmatic purchase thing. There's a bit of separation between the two. Within the rural sector, yeah, sure, but with the urban sector that Jacinda's so-called illegitimate ute owners, people aren't buying them because they're a value proposition. They're buying them because that's what they want. We can have that argument later, Richard.
Yeah.
Well, true, and I am that ute owner, Graeme. So between Richard's been, he's got two large emitter people on the talk this morning. You with your Mustang and me with my ute, and I live in an urban environment. But the ute is a practical purchase. I have a caravan. I need something to tow and throw stuff in. And until there is an affordable low emission vehicle option, nothing is going to cut the mustard. And I think that it's the transition, the rate at which we get there. And Simeon Brown makes the point, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And the Labour policies have approached this as a sprint. It's almost like a 100-metre dash to go from nothing to something. Whereas National says, well, the rest of the world is going this way. Let's leverage that and let's do it in a way where we can transition the economy for new and used vehicles. But, we've got to 2035 to do a whole lot of sensible things and still meet our 2050 targets of net zero emissions.
Yeah. So there's a political point to this that I wonder where this is going to pop out as we get close to that big thing happening in October. And I took note of Carmel Cipolloni's comments around Labour constituents having access to more affordable choices when it comes to EVs, when the difference was actually $75. I'm in West Auckland. I live right next door to her constituency in Kelston, and I'm pretty sure I can tell you that most of her constituents are very, very long way away from owning a $55,000 new BEV. They're people mover buyers. The last couple of days, we've seen a potential power shift if Labour become the government, to put a minority government together, with Te Pāti Māori Party becoming the kingmaker, so to speak. Look at their constituency in terms of the perception around needing family vehicles, very much family-focused, rural-based, for example, where the choice isn't the urban small vehicle to zip around. It's looking at family transport options. is this going to be something that's considered for the future around what is actually needed for constituents as opposed to what we have right now, which is ideology driven?
Well, I think this is something that I think Simeon and his colleagues need to look at more, is that they keep on doing this, just putting so much of their effort around clean car discount discussions into the bashing Tesla owners. And these rich people who buy Teslas, well, let's be clear, the people who are buying the Teslas that get a discount aren't necessarily wealthy people. They've just mono-focused on that when there's so much more to discuss around this. And I went on Radio New Zealand the other day, and they jumped down that usual rabbit hole of rich Teslas and so forth. And I said, no, there's more to it than that. You've got to look at, that segment of the market is just totally overlooked. These people who've ordered hybrids, totally overlooked. And I think that I personally think the National Party and ACT are just being a little bit disingenuous by just screaming for that single headline. And to be honest, I think people are probably a bit overhearing it now. It's kind of a bit overdone, and they need to actually spend the time to look at the detail of this. And it slightly concerns me they still haven't done that.
Yes and no. I think, and this is an area that impacts differentially between new and used, because then it's what I call a light commercial fleet. So the used car guys don't deal in this area in big numbers. You do each month in small numbers, but it's a big area for new vehicles. And I think it's fair to reflect that the way in which the CCD has continued to move, it impacts differentially for light commercial vehicles, and there are not a lot of useful options out there at the moment. And so they don't, the tradies, the farmers, the builders, the plumbers, and the recreational users that need something that has got good torque and pulling capability, they don't have options to do anything else at the moment, and it is just forcing costs up. So it is a line that Simeon Brown is using because he knows it's got real traction. And what I saw in the media this week is something that I hadn't seen in previous iterations, which is a wider number of other user groups complaining about this. So we now have a group of tradies and a group of other users. So there are a number of additional voices and saying, hold on here, it's really tough out there. Interest rates are up, prices are up. Our forward orders for work is coming down, and now if we need a new vehicle, we've got to replace our old ones. We're going to have a real hard think about this, because that extra $5,000 or $6,000, that's going to hurt. So that is a difference, and I think it's fertile ground for Simeon, and he knows that.
I'm not saying it's not. Well, I mean, yeah, it is fertile ground to an extent, but I actually think proportionally the impact at the other end is there's political mileage still to be made. I mean, if you take, for example, a ute, right? The average ute probably these days rolls out the door at about $60,000, $70,000. On that, there's $5,000 to $10,000 worth of accessories. So you're looking at a $70,000 or $80,000 purchase. If you take a Ford Ranger, for example, you're now up to $4,500 of a rebuild. So $4,500 on a $70,000 purchase that's generally being financed by a company or an entity or a buyer that could arguably make that work. It is a fairly small portion of that vehicle. If you go down to that other end of the market and you look at these family vehicles, you're talking about, $2,600 is it, I think, now on a Honda Odyssey, on a $10,000 Honda Odyssey, on a family that has already struggling to get financed because of the triple CFA. You've got finance companies who I think the numbers are getting so high on these vehicles, they're going to start getting reluctant to finance them because that's overhead risk. You can't get that money back if you repossess that car. It's becoming such a I just think that the bigger issues with this need to be looked at rather than just bashing on about the ute tax and the rich Tesla owners getting cars.
Richard, you're overthinking it, Richard. Politics these days has become sound bites for stupids. And it really has. And we've been over this again. You and I have been talking about this. Sound bites for stupids. And we know what the real issues are, but the public, it's just, and I'm going to take a little point that David raised a second ago. New Zealand has, I think, the highest ratio of private boat ownership in the world. What do they tow boats with? Things like that are really interesting because we as the import industry, we also see the second tier tradies, not the companies that are buying themselves new vans and new utes sort of every 3 or 4 years or so. So we deal with the guys that are going out probably the first time as a builder, or as a plumber, and so the affordability index for them is much lower. They're sort of eking at every last dollar to get a caravan or a Hiace to sling the tools in. And if you look at your caravan MV350 at potentially 3,450, I'd argue and say in some respects that's actually a much bigger bridge to get than if you're a company looking at fleet replacement or lease costs over a 3 or 4 year term. It's really interesting stuff, and has much more of an effect, I think, on the marketplace than we're talking about the ute tax end. But it's just, no one's going to pick it up. It's just not sexy stuff to talk about.
You're right, Graeme. It is hard, and we all understand the details, and we can talk about impacts right across the spectrum. Politics are sound bites, as you say, and our opportunities representing various sectors is to try and compete for those sound bites. It doesn't make for good analysis. But I think the important thing is where we do target the analysis to. So there's something else, Richard, that I think is different this time around with the discount and the changes that were made in the timing. So, and I definitely, as you noted, I don't have my MIA hat on, but I'm going to talk now about my experience with officials and some of the frustrations that we've had with officials. And I think it's fair, yes, Graeme. I think it's fair to reflect that in the last 5 years, last 5 years, we gained a distinct impression that the minister didn't trust us and that officials didn't trust us. They weren't talking to us. They were going elsewhere for their advice. And they ended up putting things in place that reflected the narrow focus of the hair shirt brigade. Woe is me, we've got to act really fast to do it. They're not going to come along. They're the problem, not part of the solution. I think what we're beginning to see is that as time's gone on, and we've all worked hard to educate the minister, he's starting to see and understand, actually, we're not crying wolf. There are some real practical issues, slightly different for the used versus new, but both groups, we have some real practical issues as a consequence of these policies. So we understand that officials had said, yeah, look, there's long wait times, there's forward orders, people have put deposits down. Let's protect those. And administratively, that's difficult to do unless you have a long lead time for the implementation. And as is the case across government at the moment, and particularly given it's an election year and the finance minister is going to want to dole out lollies in his budget, they only put 100 million in to top up the fund to address that imbalance. So that's what's caught us. But we know that officials and the minister have understood our needs better than that's in the past. So we're a victim of circumstances as well. So I think we have to appreciate that.
If we're talking sound bites, they should have made it to 200 million, because then they can kind of say it's National's probably going to throw an election that they've chucked nearly $500 million in towards these rich Tesla owners. Well, they might as well just put in $500 million if they're going to get told they're putting in $500 million. Round up. Anyway, look, let's run through the news, because half of it is about the clean car standard anyway, clean car discount anyway, and we can keep the conversation going as we run through this thing. So let's throw this up on the screen, and this is just our lead off with it, running through the details. Most hybrids lose rebate in clean car change. Clean car discount rebates and charges will change for vehicles registered from July 1, 2023, with polluters paying more and hybrids no longer getting rebates. Well, most hybrids no longer getting rebates. So this is, the news as it broke on the day. Look, we've all probably seen the details now. We don't have to run through those too much. The thing I weirdly found about it was the little rise in the import subsidy. It seemed a bit of a weird one. I'm not sure if there was some particular maths around that, whether either of you have any understanding of that, but it seemed weird just to raise it by $50. I don't know if it was just a token or if there was some kind of calculation behind the scene. You had any thoughts around that, Graeme or David? Why they did that little rise?
Calculations behind the scenes. I think they just changed the basis of the calculations a little bit. And I think the optics also look better because the government had been criticised for cancelling the other initiatives, and the Prime Minister said, well, wait, there's more coming.
Yes.
And I think there's given that they've canned some of the social leasing schemes and other things, this was some way intended to address or have the perception of addressing affordability of BEVs for those who can't afford a new one. It's just playing with optics. So it was an opportunity when they changed the basis of the calculation.
It's interesting, the shift of the new car subsidy from the people I've been talking to and watching the various EV groups online. It almost seems like the cut might boost electric vehicle sales, at least in the short term, because I think it's given a bit of sentiment out there that it's only going to keep on going down and it may not last for long. So get your orders in now kind of an approach. I'm not sure if that's something your members have fed back, David.
Yeah, I think people are starting to look at it. You might recall in March last year, we had enormous ute sales because the fee was about to come on in April, and in April we had almost nothing. And I'm wondering whether we'll see the same sort of boost in June versus July, noting that it'll only be with the current stock that's already in the market. I'm not expecting to see much change in the uptake of BEVs and PEVs in the new vehicle market. I just think that will remain the same. What we will be following is whether there is a downturn in hybrid sales, and by how much. So I think it's fair to reflect that I'm not expecting to see all of those sales disappear, but I am expected to see some disappear. I just don't know whether it's 5%, 10% or 20%. And all of those reductions will be felt by the importers. We, in the new vehicle sector, the stock that's arriving now was confirmed back in April, May last year. And new vehicle distributors are confirming stock for the entirety of 2024. Those arrangements are largely completed now, or will be completed by the end of the month. And then they only have a little bit of ability to tweak, but they can't cancel those. So we end up having stock that was ordered on the intentions of where we thought policies would go. And then policies get changed. And so then we've landed with stock and say, oh, hell, that's created a bit of a challenge for us. So we don't know how that challenge will play out.
Do you think you'll end up with the yard absolutely devoid of aquas before the last day of June, Graeme?
No, I don't think so, actually. I mean, the difference for an aqua is not as substantial as we're talking about. They're still going to, all the aquas still qualify for a subsidy, just the subsidy is not quite as much. I think it was going down from, say, $1,500 to $1,200, rough sort of figures. So, and honestly, Richard, I don't think it's had the far-reaching influence in terms of people's purchasing decision that people would like to make it out. We've got lots of aquas for sale as a nation because aquas are now available and they're economical. And the driving force behind aqua sale is not the subsidy, it's the fact that they have a really good fuel efficiency rating. And they've reached that point of affordability. I mean, and it's already too late to purchase stock in Japan now to meet the July the 1st. You're not going to get it here. You're not going to get your stock right now that you even bought back in January, let alone stuff you're going to buy in May. And so it's not going to have an influence on the buying going forward, I think, as much as we'd like to think, because you've still got a limited range of choice in Japan to purchase. And the demand at this end is still for smaller, lightweight, 5-door hatchbacks. That's the driver in the marketplace. The SUV market, that's not going anywhere because people still need SUVs. The people mover market, same thing. It's just going to cost them more when they turn up to the dealership to purchase. So we're not going to see, I think, much of a change in buying patterns.
I wonder if Simon Rutherford and Neeraj Lala are like trying to get ship captains' numbers to call them and bribe them to just push that throttle forward just a little bit more, get here just a little bit earlier.
Yeah, well,
said the captain of the Titanic, as I recall.
They come via Australia. We know what's happening there at the moment. They're all getting caught up, so it's kind of complicated. But the pragmatist in me says for both new and used vehicles, I think hybrids are going to continue to sell anyway because the value proposition around that is the fuel reductions and the price of petrol, and they still can do those savings. And I think there is what's different now compared to 2019 and prior to them is the mood within New Zealand has swung from climate change being a ho-hum for a lot of people to actually being something that we need to do something about. I think there is a much stronger impetus with people to be seen to be doing something that's in their control, and buying hybrid vehicles, I think, will still be attractive because they're the next best affordable option compared to pure internal combustion engine equivalents. So I think there's still a swing. What the clean car discount changes is doing is pushing around the margin around hybrids. But I don't know what you feel, Graeme. I think the mood out there is that people if they can afford it, they'll prefer a hybrid over an ICE vehicle.
Yeah, and again, you're talking about a value proposition because it's not around. We don't see a lot of buyers that talk about it being an environmental decision in terms of the bigger picture for doing their part. It's the price of fuel. And so the thing that's going to really make a big difference that everyone's forgetting about is what's going to happen in July. What happens to the price of fuel in July? Exactly. And so I think there'll be a rush back in to people to look at more affordable choices when it comes to fuel efficiency based not around a subsidy, just on the physical cost of petrol at the pump. And you know what? If you go back years and years and years with lobbying, and I'm sure, David, at an MIA level as well, and I know VIA had the same sort of conversations back in the day when it was I and BDA, was to minister. If you want to influence people's behaviour about what they buy, the simplest tool is the price of fuel. It has the single biggest effect, or it has in the past, about what people choose to buy and use. Is if you really want to, and this is the problem, of course, it's not a popular alternative to put the price of petrol up to $4 a litre. But if you did that, watch what everyone buys tomorrow.
So I recall, it was quite a long time ago now, but I recall when I was General Manager of Land Transport, Safety and Environment at the Ministry of Transport. And I said to them, well, you want to do that? Just put the price of petrol up. Mm-hmm. And 2005-8, Labor was in, that really caused conniptions and wriggling room because that affects people who don't have a lot of discretionary income. Flip forward to about 5 years ago when all of this was coming out on the fore again. Kit and I had some very serious discussions around what's going to be our collective advocacy point. And Kit made the comment, price of fuel, which had been consistent for, and I said, yeah, I understand perfectly what it's saying. Just think politics. Think who's in government, Labor, Greens, coalition. Think about who they get their votes from and the amount of discretionary income. Not going to happen.
Yeah.
But
come 1 July, it's going to happen.
Nice door chime, David.
Sorry?
Nice door chime.
Let's quickly run through some of the actual positions that have been put out there by the various industry organisations around this. If we put up from the MIA, that is absolutely not represented in this event today. MIA Chief Executive Amy Wiley says the timing of the change is its biggest concern. Our most significant concern is the timing for the clean car discount package. Change, Wiley said in the statement. Such a short notice period for the industry to prepare for 1 July CCD changes will cause difficulties for the new vehicle sector for two key reasons. Wait lists and the ability to deal with forward supply orders. Notice period would have been nicer. We've covered off that. There's some pretty key issues and practical issues. I think the important thing for the industry too is that we're not arguing here with the need to do this stuff anymore or the need to deal with emissions. We're arguing around the functions and how that this is being handled and whether it's being handled in a way that's actually practical. VIA, and we're still a moment of process putting this up for so the layout's a bit funny. People movers and other used cars will be less accessible under CCD changes. VIA says changes to the clean car discount will negatively impact on the consumer, especially large families who will be penalised for buying used 7 and 8-seater people movers for which there is no low emissions option. So that's VIA. The AA, they put out, I think, some actual quite good practical information for buyers, which is, I think, rare for them these days. car buyers who have paid a deposit on a new vehicle should talk to their dealers following the recent adjustment to the government's Clean Car Discount Scheme, the AA says. The popularity of the scheme has meant the government will be lowering the rebate paid out to some buyers of low-emission vehicles from July 1. AA Principal Policy Advisor Terry Collins says the scheme was always designed to be flexible and discounts were being adjusted because more New Zealanders than originally forecast had purchased a lower-emitting vehicle and received rebates. If you've entered into a purchase agreement for a vehicle that will not be delivered before 1st July, go back to your dealer sooner rather than later and discuss whether these changes will have any impact on the price. I guess it's only an impact on the price. Well, it's not really an impact on the price, isn't it? It's an impact of what you got to pay to get on the road. Okay, so they've got it wrong. AA, go and change your press release.
Richard, it's not even getting on the road. Getting the vehicle on the road stays exactly the same. Yeah. It's this is the beauty, if you like, of CCD.
Unless it's a penalty, Graeme, because it's on registration. It's paid at the point of registration, which is a non-road cost.
Yeah. Okay, I take your point.
Yes. But they've still got it wrong.
Most consumers think price has been all of this together, and they don't separate out government taxes, levies, from our costs of getting it from source to the dealer yard.
Yeah. I think we almost do too well in that in New Zealand. A lot of other countries, you have to go and actually deal with that yourself separately. So maybe I think that helps people understand a little more about what it actually means to get a vehicle on the road. But then that gets all sorts of complicated things like temporary paper number plates and that kind of junk that we don't really want to get into in New Zealand. We do have a nice simple system. The MTA says the CCD changes don't address reverse Robin Hood effect. MTA. Clean car discount changes have done little to address the reverse Robin Hood effect that gives to the rich and continue to penalise hard-working Kiwis, says the Motor Trade Association. I'm sick of this class war BS. There's rich people driving utes as well.
What I'm also a little bit tired of is I'm really bemused by the Motor Trade Association's this particular press release.
Yep.
So when I look at the membership of the Motor Trade Association in terms of dealers, I think the numbers are still about 80% of the dealers that they have are franchise dealers. And because they're franchise dealers, they're dealing with new vehicles. It's a key commercial relationship between the importer and a franchise distributor, dealer. And yet the messaging they've got here is not got anything to do with that. And it just bemuses me entirely. Because I think they need to be just a bit more careful with their messaging. Sure, they have lots of interest in the used car trade as well, but this reverse Robin effect, I think, is just really shallow analysis.
Yeah. I'm trying to read the angle here, but generally, Motor Trade Association press releases tend to focus more on even when they're talking about a dealer issue, they tend to focus more on the repair industry. It's like, how can we keep cars on the road that need to be fixed more? It seems to sometimes be the core of their message, and I'm not sure if we can find it in that hole somewhere. I guess we need to remember that. I think, again, of the whole motor trade membership, it's like 90% repair rather than dealer, rather than retail.
Oh well, that's true. That is true, and they are repairs, garages, workshops, and also fuel retailing. But of the dealers, when you're looking at that dealer mix, sometimes the messaging is a bit odd, in my view and in my opinion.
Yes, yeah. Right, we'll go to our last response on the CCD, and that is from Toyota. Toyota boss saddened by CCD impact on customers. Toyota New Zealand Chief Executive Neeraj Lala says he is saddened that the latest changes to the clean car discount will potentially affect the affordability of low emissions vehicle technology for customers. Lala says many of Toyota's customers have placed orders in good faith for both high and low emission vehicles, with a clear idea of what the rebate or fee will be as part of their affordability decision. As a brand, we hold the relationship with our customers at the heart of what we do, so I'm saddened by the fact that many of them who have waited extended periods for their vehicles due to us not being able to supply them fast enough will now be penalised by either reduction or rebate or increase in the fee with very little notice. Unfortunately, the Clean Car Discount Scheme is a relationship between the New Zealand government and the consumer, but ultimately this decision impacts their relationship with our brand. An interesting take there. I asked Neeraj on the phone the other day if they might look at doing something to, I guess, cushion the impact, and I don't think he ruled it out. But I also understand that with tens of millions of dollars that are kind of wrapped up in this issue, that that in itself is incredibly problematic for them. There's another thing I wanted to note when it comes to brands like Toyota and Ford, who are very heavy on the ute side, and I know that behind the scenes both those companies are working to get electrified light commercial vehicles into the country. And you may have a view on this too, David, but those guys are likely to go plug-in hybrid or hybrid first. Certainly Toyota's likely to go hybrid first. I can't see how any of those vehicles, at least in the first instance, are going to even make it under that 100 grand banner. Have you had any thought around that?
Well, I can speculate, yes. When the electrified options come, they'll be at the higher end of it. And what we've already seen in the light commercial vehicle is the inability for them to get that below the 80k cap. So they're coming in at the top end. And a fully electrified ute that's got a decent battery pack, that can do the distance and tow and do the hard work, all of the engineering around the motors and the strength of the motors, that being able to work in a wet environment, etc. It means R&D upfront, means cost and recovery. So yeah, that's going to be a problem. But look, can I just go back to the sentiments expressed by Neeraj? The relationship between the brand and the customer. I think the new vehicle sector, a lot of them have been impacted by the CCD changes and the short notice. They're all hurting because that's the key relationship that's been affected. Is the customer to the brand. That's the collateral damage from governments moving too quickly and not giving industry enough time to do the adjustment. Which in some way, I guess, they still see us as being part of the problem and not the solution, which is unfortunate.
I was going to say, who'd know better about manufacturing motor vehicles than not people that make them, but governments, right? And I'm going to say also, I bet that the first word that Neeraj said wasn't saddened, and it was probably a phrase that we can't repeat on a family show like this either. But
and not just him, Graeme.
Yes.
Right, now let's move on before we go to a actual. Hang on a second.
Not a Mustang story, Richard. We're done on Mustangs.
No,
today, okay?
no, it's your favourite type of story, Graeme.
Oh, yeah, I like those ones. David can chip in on this one too, I'm sure. It's a sort of story I like. Dealer
fine. It's just repetitive. Dealer fined $22,000 for non-disclosed. Well, it's not fined. Been awarded. Fined $20,000 for neglecting to inform a customer the vehicle they purchased had previously been declared a write-off due to a severe accident. Nourish New Zealand Limited (NNZ) is being penalised following a motor vehicle disputes tribunal decision in favour of buyers Romeo Xavier and Shiba Romeo. I'd just like to note, buyers, if your car dealership has a name that doesn't sound anywhere near like a car dealership, think twice. The couple purchased a repaired 2019 Toyota Corolla from NNZ in 2022 for $25,000, unaware that the vehicle had been involved in an accident in New Zealand nearly 2 years prior. The car was deemed a statutory write-off after sustaining heavy damage impact and structural harm to both the passenger and driver's sides. They soon discovered issues with their newly acquired vehicle, including rust spots, metal fragments on the windows, a loose front bumper, and a leaking roof that led to window damage costing nearly $8,000 to repair. NNZ claimed at the hearing that the car's write-off status was due to hail damage rather than the extent of collision damage. Bit to unpack here. I'm going to start off with saying some controversial things, because that's why we're going to do it. A, don't buy damaged Australian cars. B, why are you spending $25,000 on a 3-year-old Toyota Corolla when a brand new Toyota Corolla is all of about, I think at the time when they purchased this, about $32,000, $33,000. And yeah, I don't know. Anyway, just the name of this dealership suggests to me that there ain't no dealership, and this is a guy on TradeMe, and that's a random cute company name he's using. And I think we need to be very, very clear, because it's a very, very similar, like within, I think, one letter to the company name of Nourish Group, which owns a whole pile of restaurants and cafes in New Zealand. It's not the same company, just to be clear, as far as I can see.
Age-old thing. We rant about this virtually every 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I have the same sort of opinion. There's actually nothing fundamentally wrong with the idea of purchasing damaged vehicles and rebuilding them if they've not suffered significant damage. And then, hey, you be the judge. You tell me what's significant. I don't know. As long as the process is adhered to. And where we get these things unstuck, time and time again, show after show, it's not because the vehicle shouldn't have been sold in the first place. It's a failure to disclose. Is that it always comes down to the system itself. We have a structural engineer involved. We have all the different things that you should actually have, but people just don't disclose it. If they just did that, if that one thing alone was adhered to, 90% of the stories that we have on about bad dealers selling shit cars, we wouldn't be talking about because they'd be disclosed.
I think failure to disclose is the wrong term, because that's not a failure to disclose. That's an outright avoiding disclosure at all costs, because I don't think if they had disclosed, that car would be worth anywhere near $25,000.
Well, here's the rub, guys. For 10 years, I've been trying to get the repair rule revised, because the definition of structural damage is physical rather than with a whole lot of stuff now. We've been autonomous, automated driving assist systems that are structurally important how a car operates. And guess who's been most hesitant for the repair rule and structural damage and disclosure to be mandated? And it's the insurance companies. And that really puzzles me. But then I figured out, well, actually, it's because they can sell their vehicles for more and not put the premiums up. We've just said consistently, and this has been a bugbear of mine for about 20 years, let the people know what the true history of the vehicle is, and let the market decide what the value is. And I've said for a long time there should be mandatory disclosure. And we've got some disclosure around Australian written-off vehicles where we don't get it in New Zealand. And it's a shame, because it just provides for the ability for those that are of a mind to extract gold out of the grandmother's teeth and sell it, to do the same with cars. And that's what we've got. We've just got a percentage of the trade that is rat bag. And they can get away with it. It's just very sad.
Yep.
Well, David, now that you're in the rarefied atmosphere of the MIA, welcome back down to the sewers down here where we play. And there are rat bags. This industry has got 95% are really, and new and used, 95% are really good business people out to do the best they can to provide great transport solutions to the public. 5% are tow rags. And whether they were selling fish or jute bags or cars, they're bullshit artists, and there'll always be that 5% threshold.
And Richard, coming back to your point, don't buy. I hear you loud and clear, but unfortunately, I think there are a lot of consumers out there who just naturally see the glass as half full and not half empty. And so it's a risk proposition. And that's why I think, and this is where markets fail, and this is a goal of governments around the world, is to have a look at where market fails and put interventions in place to address that. And there are a lot of genuinely, gullible people who don't realise that they're gullible. And there are those who know that there's a lot of people like that, and they'll play it if they can. If there's a bob to be made, they'll make it. So we're going to see more of these stories, and you'll hear me say the same thing. We need some changes to make this harder for them to do.
Bring back the Fidelity Fund. Bring back money in the bank to become a dealer.
Oh, God knows how much money did we tip into that thing over the years, and it was frequent. And I mean, to our credit, we never saw dime one back out of it, or needed dime one out of it. And I at the time, a lot of the criticism around the Fed Fund was that 95% of the good dealers were subsidising 5% of the shit bags. Again, 5% of the dirt bags back in the 80s, and we were all just tipping in to help them run a bad business and get out of it scot-free. And that didn't seem fair and equitable either. We like that word equitable, don't we, Minister? That didn't seem to be the case either. So no, Richard, no.
Yeah. Right, well, speaking of the sewers, we've got a story here out of the US. Facebook Marketplace.
Oh, God. How good could this be?
Well, Well, it's interesting in a couple of ways. And look, it doesn't actually apply to New Zealand as yet, as we understand. I don't think New Zealand even technically allowed dealers to officially list in Marketplace yet. But they're probably not going to, because Facebook has banned US dealers from Marketplace. In a move that impacts cards in the USA, Facebook Marketplace no longer permits authorized dealers to post used card listings on the platform via their Facebook business pages. The decision, effective since January, is seen by industry experts as an attempt by Meta, Facebook's parent company, to encourage car dealers to opt for paid advertising. It is unclear yet what this means for dealers outside of the US. Facebook released an official statement explaining they are simply changing how inventory may be displayed in the future, and that they continue to invest in innovative solutions to deliver on automotive sector's needs for the future. In practical terms, this means auto dealers, along with real estate and rental companies, can no longer use can only use Facebook's paid advertising platform for listing used vehicles. I kind of see this one as an interesting one, in that I don't think we necessarily have this function yet in New Zealand. Hopefully it means we will, I guess, get that function to properly advertise things in the future, because at the moment I see a lot of stuff that is from, I guess, what you would call dealers appearing looking a little bit privately listed on Facebook Marketplace. I think, again, these things need to be a little clearer, a little more cleaned up. It's a good thing if people know who dealers are. It's potentially a bad thing if dealers are on there trying to look like private buyers. Graeme, is Facebook Marketplace a sewer when it comes to vehicle trading?
Yeah, of course it is. I've said this for ages. Marketplace is just it's the stuff that filters down to the bottom grate. The drain ends up in Facebook. And not always. Yes, I know there are traders out there that use it really effectively. But for those that are putting cars on there with just phone numbers and no contact details for a dealership and just happen to be parked on a bit of gravel, of course. And you've got to argue and say this is where the sort of the debris ends up. But you can also get a little bit cynical and say that, yeah, well, there's probably revenue in this for Facebook as they look to reinvent themselves under the Meta brand as a mechanism to drive away. And it's like the Trade Me thing all over again, where it happened 15, 20 years ago, where it just compressed it down to a model where you were forced to pay under the model structure they put in place for you had an alternative. So cynical says this is also a cash cow grab.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Graeme. And I think if you can't step back, and if I was an official, I'd be asking the question, what's in New Zealand Inc.'s best interest? And when you start looking at warranties and other issues and culpability, if you're a dealer, then there's lots of laws that sort of relate to what your responsibilities are. And hiding in Facebook allows them to get away with that. So I just think it's an escape. I mean, if Meta wants to have a platform and says if you're a dealer or real estate agent or whatever, and you've got to advertise through that, I kind of think that that's probably in the long run the better thing. Sure, there's going to be a cost bit to it, and that's between buyer and provider. But if it improves traceability and the ability for people to be able to get compensation if they sold a rat, etc., and trace the traceability and avoid what we just had with the previous story, then maybe that's a good thing. But yeah, Facebook is it should be left to friends just telling stories and posting pics.
Hey, look, I've seen this again before. I do love looking at cars on Facebook Marketplace. I mean, it goes back to my days as like a 14-year-old desperately waiting to get my license and my learner's license on my 15th birthday, and sitting there with the Trade Exchange every week, looking through the free car section or the $150 cars, just seeing what was there and thinking, oh, that Cortina with a little bit of rust could be a bit of me, but yeah, it's Facebook's kind of thing now. I peruse for weird stuff.
But isn't that what Trade Me and Driven and some of the other platforms are all about?
Yeah, but Driven no longer does listings, and Trade Me, people with really cheap, weird cars tend to check them on Facebook because they can't be bothered paying to list them.
Well, you've also got to find it too. So the beauty of, and what's even Trade Exchange, the beauty of AutoTrader, and I'm an AutoTrader guy. I used to have AutoTrader stolen from me from the local dairy under threat of bodily harm when I was 13, 14. It was because it was all there in front of you. You just turn over to each page, and each page was a new voyage of discovery, something you hadn't thought you ever wanted before. So the picture thing was what really made it beneficial. You just found stuff you never knew existed in AutoTrader. Whereas TNE to an extent, and now TradeMe, you've kind of got to go looking for it to find it. You've got to sort of stumble into it. Whereas AutoTrader was just, I didn't know. I wanted I don't know what it was, but there it was on the page. It was just that. Yeah.
I think Facebook's also very good at suggesting stuff that might pique your interest, even if it shouldn't. But anyway, I know someone's going to, one of you's got to go, so we'll quickly go through the last three, and it really is just a really quick mention, just because I kind of feel sorry for them, and that's Honda New Zealand. They were kind of really badly placed when it came to the clean car standard this week, in that literally the day after it was announced, they launched a hybrid SUV that was going to get a subsidy, and then is no longer going to get a subsidy. And Honda New Zealand general manager Peter Ashley told media at the launch that the brand is still getting to grips with the amendments. It's I feel for them. That's a pretty cool car. They got high demand for it, but it landed and was basically straight away feedback gone. Now, look, thank you everyone for joining us. Now, we will have a magazine out early next week, slightly later than normal, and for a very good reason. On Monday, I'm having a sit-down with Transport Minister Michael Wood. I'm going to put a lot of questions about the clean car discount changes to him, and hopefully we'll have some answers in that next magazine. From my experience, he's not going to move or tell us anything particularly new, but it's, I think, always good to put the industry's questions and concerns in front of the minister. So we will have that out next week, and we can talk about it next week on the live stream. But thank you, Graeme, for joining us as usual, and thank you for popping in now that you're in your semi-retired, in no way tied to the MIA position, former NZTA Waikakotahi staff member David Crawford. Thanks, everyone.